Hello everyone, Professor Berninger here. Welcome to another literature class. Today's work we're going to discuss is Nathaniel Hawthorne's classic tale, Young Goodman Brown. And this very well may be the most important story you'll ever read in your life, because it's a story about a moment that we all come to, sometimes quickly like Young Goodman Brown, and sometimes a little more slowly, but it's the moment in life when we gain knowledge of good and evil. And maybe more importantly, we gain the knowledge that it's rarely as clear as good and evil. Just like in this story, there are a lot of confusing shades of gray. But one of Hawthorne's main points, and Hawthorne, his ancestor was a judge at the Salem witch trials, which he was a bit ashamed of. He, in fact, changed the spelling of his last name by a letter, so to disassociate a little bit. Hawthorne always gives the Puritans a hard time. If you want to learn about the Puritans, read a book about the Puritans, but Hawthorne is always kind of sticking it to them. And he's very critical of the Puritans for not preparing Brown well for the moment in life when you learn that the people around you are not perfect, right? Are not perfect. So this story, as confusing as it may be, and it is confusing, do you know why? Because gaining knowledge of good and evil is confusing. Think how simple life was in second grade, when maybe you knew good and bad, but life was pretty simple. And as an adult, it's much, much more complex. And how you transition from youth, young Goodman, or young whoever you are, to adulthood is very important. And of course, it's never too late to continue to transition. But your response to knowledge, your Garden of Eden moment, that is very, very important to setting the tone for your entire life. So we're going to work on the story today in our YouTube video, and I'm going to sort of walk through it literally with you, and hopefully it'll all make much more sense than it did upon your first reading. If you were confused at the end, don't worry. It's a confusing story. We'll talk more about why a little bit later. So our story begins with two very important references and a symbol here. Young Goodman Brown came forth at sunset. Symbolism, sunset, moving from light into dark. Into the street of Salem Village, Salem, Massachusetts, right? Notable for its Salem witch trials of the 1600s, in which over 20 people were executed after being accused and convicted of being witches. It's a very dark moment in American history. Whenever anybody says this is a witch hunt, it means that someone is being accused of something that they didn't do. So the Salem is associated with that. If you've never been to Salem, I recommend going. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. So young Goodman Brown came forth at sunset into the street of Salem Village, but put his head back. After crossing the threshold, right? This is the threshold of the door, to exchange a parting kiss with his young wife, who was aptly named Faith. Faith thrust her own pretty head into the street, letting the wind play with her pink ribbons while she called to Goodman Brown. So that opening paragraph, the symbolism, the very important symbolism of the threshold, and Faith kissing him goodbye. Threshold, symbolic of I'm on the threshold of something. I'm moving from one space to another. Salem and light into the woods and, appropriately, darkness. I've been moving in and out of the light and darkness, if you haven't noticed, in this first segment. So the symbolism there is very, very important. He's on the threshold. He's going through a passage. And how we go through this passage of gaining knowledge of good and evil is essential to the life that we will lead until the day we die. Because remember, the story starts with young Goodman Brown, been married 3 months, life just starting for him, right, as an adult. And it ends with a march to his grave where they carved "No Hopeful Verse" upon his gravestone. But we'll get there. We have a long way to go before we get there.